I wasn't supposed to see her that often. She was just my friend's mom, someone I'd known in the background since high school, the kind of adult you nodded at politely when you dropped by. But that summer, after I came back from college, I kept running into her. The first time was at the small coffee shop off Main, the one with the scratched tables and burnt espresso smell. I was there because I didn't feel like going home. She was there because, well, I don't know why she was there. She was sitting by the window, half hidden behind a book, her glasses low on her nose. I almost didn't recognize her. When she looked up and caught me staring, I gave a clumsy nod. She smiled, small and quick, then went back to her page. I should have kept walking, but the place was nearly empty. I ordered a black coffee and sat 2 tables away. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. The truth was, I'd been leaving most messages unanswered lately. Too much explaining, too much pretending I was fine. A few minutes later, the barista mixed up our cups. I reached for the one that wasn't mine, and she noticed at the same time. "That's mine," she said, not unkindly. "Oh, sorry," I muttered, pulling back. Her smile came again, faint but warmer this time. "Still not a fan of sugar, I see." It took me a second to realize what she meant. She remembered. Years ago, I'd come over after practice, sweaty and starving, and she'd handed me a glass of iced tea. I'd refused the sugar. A small detail from a lifetime ago, and she carried it. "You remember that?" I asked. "I have a good memory," she said, lifting her cup. I wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't line up. Instead, I unfolded my napkin and folded it again, trying to look casual. She watched me with a kind of patient amusement, like she'd seen me do this before. Maybe she had. We ended up talking about nothing important. Books, the weather, how the coffee here was too bitter, but somehow better than anywhere else. The conversation stumbled, restarted, drifted. I found myself flicking my eyes toward her hands as she turned her pages. They looked steady, deliberate, nothing like mine, restless on the table. When she finally stood to leave, I expected her to just nod and walk out. But she paused, hand on her bag, and said, "Don't stay here too late. This place feels heavier after dark." I laughed softly, not sure what she meant, but the sound felt good. She gave a small wave and slipped out the door. I watched her cross the street, the late sun catching her hair in a way I hadn't noticed before. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. I sat there longer than I needed to, staring at the napkin I'd folded into a neat square. My phone buzzed again, a new message lighting the screen. I ignored it until I saw the name. It wasn't my friend. It was her. Just a short line, no punctuation. "This stays between us." I read it twice, then a third time, before the meaning even began to settle in. And that was the beginning of everything I couldn't forget. The text sat on my phone all night, glowing at me like it wanted an answer. "This stays between us." She hadn't added anything else. No smiley, no explanation. I typed half a dozen replies and erased them all. In the end, I said nothing. But the next day, I found myself walking past her house anyway. Her porch light was on, though it was still afternoon, and her blinds were tilted halfway shut. I caught myself wondering if she was waiting for someone. She wasn't. She opened the door when she saw me hesitate on the steps. "You walk by without saying hello?" she teased lightly, leaning against the frame. I stammered something about fresh air, about heading to the corner store. She let me inside anyway. The place smelled faintly of chamomile tea and furniture polish. Her living room looked the same as it had years ago, except emptier. No shoes piled by the door. No backpacks abandoned by the couch. My friend, her son, wasn't living here anymore. That absence pressed against everything. "Tea?" she asked. I nodded, and while she disappeared into the kitchen, I stood there staring at the framed pictures on the mantel. One of them was me, younger, grinning at some birthday party. She must have noticed me looking because she said, from the kitchen, "You practically lived here in high school." "Yeah," I murmured. "Feels different now." When she returned with 2 mugs, she lowered herself onto the sofa with a sigh that sounded heavier than she meant it to. She handed me mine and smiled. "Don't worry. I didn't put sugar in." That broke the tension, and I laughed softly. Still, I couldn't help noticing the faint circles under her eyes. "You look tired," I said before I could stop myself. She didn't flinch, just blew on her tea. Divorce papers do that. It was the first time she'd said it out loud to me. I felt the words ripple through the room, landing somewhere deep. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "Not exactly something you announce," she replied with a small shrug. "Anyway, it's done." She took a sip, her gaze lingering on the mug like she was afraid to look up. I wanted to ask questions, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her hand tighten around the handle. It struck me how strange it was, being old enough now to notice the small ways adults carried pain. We sat in silence for a while. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I shifted in my seat, folded the edge of the napkin she'd placed under my cup. "Same nervous tick as yesterday." "You still do that?" she said suddenly, a tiny smile tugging her lips. "Do what?" "Fold things when you don't know what to say." Heat rose to my face. I tried to laugh it off. Guess some habits stick. Her smile softened, then faded. She looked at me longer than she should have, like she was seeing me and also trying not to. I felt the weight of it. How close and how impossible it was, all at once. Inside my head, scenarios flickered. What if I reached for her hand? What if someone saw me here? What would my friend say? The guilt curled in before anything could happen, sharp and heavy. She seemed to sense it because she leaned back, breaking the moment. "Don't overthink," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. But I did. I overthought everything. When I left that evening, she walked me to the door. I muttered some excuse about errands. She nodded, her hand resting briefly on the doorframe. Just before I stepped out, she reached up, not to touch me exactly, but to smooth a crease out of my shirt collar. "There," she said softly, almost like it was nothing. It lasted a second, maybe less, but it felt like a confession. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. After that evening on her couch, I kept telling myself I wouldn't go back. It was too easy, too strange. But I did. A week later, I was standing on her porch again, pretending it was accidental, pretending I just happened to be passing by. She let me in without asking why. This time she was barefoot, hair pulled up, sleeves rolled. She looked younger, somehow, though the weariness was still there. "I was about to make tea," she said. "Want some?" I nodded, though I wasn't thirsty. We ended up at the small kitchen table, the kind meant for two people who lived quietly. The kettle hissed between us. I wanted to ask why she'd texted me that night. "This stays between us," but the words lodged in my throat. She must have felt it. "You're quieter than usual," she said softly. "I guess," I muttered. "Lot on my mind." Her eyes lingered, like she wanted to ask what. Instead, she reached for the kettle. That's when the back door opened. "Mom." It was my friend. He hadn't lived here in months, but suddenly, there he was, stepping inside like he never left. My chest locked. Her hand stilled on the kettle. For half a beat, the air went sharp. Then she smiled, smooth, practiced. "Didn't know you were coming by," she said. He looked at me, surprised. "Oh, hey man, what are you doing here?" I mumbled something about borrowing a book. My voice cracked halfway through, and I hated how guilty it sounded. We didn't stay long after that. She handed me a paperback from the shelf, something random, and walked me to the door while her son dug through the fridge. At the threshold, she leaned in just a fraction, lowering her voice. "Careful," she whispered. "Careful." The word stuck. That night, I replayed every detail. The way she'd gone still when he walked in. The quick recovery. The warning at the door. I told myself to stop. To leave it where it was. But I couldn't. 2 days later, I went back. She was outside watering plants, the evening air heavy with late summer heat. I stood there watching her for too long, until she finally noticed me. "You shouldn't," she began, then cut herself off. "I know," I said. Silence stretched. "The watering can drip between us." She set it down slowly, meeting my eyes. For a moment, I thought she might step closer. My heart raced in my throat. Instead, She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her hand trembling slightly. Not much, just enough for me to notice. I stepped toward her without meaning to. Close enough to smell the faint trace of her shampoo. Close enough that if either of us leaned in, the space would collapse. Her breath caught. Mine did too. But then she turned, fast, almost abrupt. Picked up the watering can again. "The plants will die if I don't finish," she said. Like that explained everything. And maybe it did. It was late August when we ended up walking together. Not planned. I'd been cutting across the park after class, earbuds in, trying to avoid going home. She was there on the path, carrying a small tote bag from the grocery store. We both stopped. Neither of us made the first move, but somehow we ended up side by side, falling into step. "Hot today," she said after a while, her voice low, like the weather was all she could safely talk about. "Yeah," I replied. My throat was dry. The park was nearly empty, just a couple of joggers in the distance, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees. We reached a bench under a shade tree, and she set the tote down with a sigh. "Let's sit for a minute." We did. I could feel the heat radiating from the wood. She kept her hands in her lap, fingers loosely interlaced, but every so often they shifted, restless. I watched, not meaning to. After a stretch of silence, she said, "You know, I sometimes forget how old you are." The words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't sure what she meant, if it was a compliment or a warning. "Too young," I said quietly, trying to joke but failing. Her lips twitched. Too young for certain things. Neither of us looked at the other. The cicadas filled the space. I wanted to laugh, or run, or confess something I couldn't. Instead, I pressed my palms against my knees, forcing myself to sit still. "You should be spending time with people your age," she added after a beat. "Not here, not with me." It wasn't angry, just weary, like she was already arguing with herself and losing. I swallowed hard. "Maybe I don't want people my age." That came out sharper than I meant. She turned, eyes narrowing just slightly, searching my face for something. I felt exposed under that gaze, like she was pulling the words out of me without me saying them. The silence dragged. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "You remind me of him." "Who?" She looked down at her hands. "Your friend. When he was younger. The way you fill the room. The way you look like you're waiting for life to begin." I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me burned at being compared, but another part of me saw the sadness beneath it. The gap between who she wanted near her and who was actually here. "You don't have to explain," I muttered. But she did. "I'm not supposed to need anyone. Not anymore. Divorce teaches you that." Her voice cracked faintly, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. I turned toward her, closer than I should have been. "You're allowed to need someone." Her breath caught. She stared straight ahead, blinking like the air had turned heavy. "And what about you? Do you even know what you're asking for?" The question wasn't meant to be answered, but my chest ached with one anyway. I wanted to tell her I did, that I'd been carrying it for weeks, maybe longer. Instead, I let the silence stand. A jogger passed, the thud of shoes on gravel snapping the moment in two. We both looked away as if the world had caught us doing something it shouldn't. When the sound faded, she finally turned back, her voice lower now. "You can't keep coming here. People will notice." "I don't care if they notice," I said before I could stop myself. Her hand shifted, brushing against mine on the bench. Just a touch. Not intentional, maybe, but she didn't pull away. Neither did I. The air between us tightened, sharp with everything unspoken. She looked at me then, really looked, and her lips parted like she might say something final, or maybe lean in, but she didn't. She froze, eyes searching mine, 1,000 words unspoken between us. And then, almost too quietly to hear, she asked, "What are we doing?" The question hung there, heavier than anything else. And I had no answer. After that afternoon on the park bench, I thought something had shifted between us. I walked home carrying the weight of her question, "What are we doing?" as if it were addressed to me alone. I half expected her to text. She didn't. Days passed, then a week. I tried to tell myself to let it fade, to not go back, but the silence gnawed at me. Eventually, I gave in. When I finally knocked on her door, there was no answer. Her car was in the driveway, the blinds half drawn. I stood there too long, debating if I should ring again. Then the door opened a crack. She looked different, hair pulled back tight, expression guarded. "Hi," I started too casually. "What are you doing here?" Her tone wasn't cruel, just clipped. I blinked. "I was just passing by." Her eyes softened for a second, then hardened again. "You shouldn't keep coming." The words landed like a stone. I wanted to protest, to remind her of the way her hand had brushed mine, the way she'd looked at me on the bench. But the look on her face stopped me. Something else was in her eyes, something heavier than distance. Before I could speak, a voice called from inside. A man's voice. "Do you need help with that?" My chest tightened. I stepped back. She turned quickly, blocking the doorway with her body. "No, I've got it," she called back over her shoulder. When she looked at me again, her face was unreadable. "I'm busy. You should go." The door closed before I could answer. That night, I stared at my phone, scrolling through unsent drafts. Every version of a message sounded either too needy or too cold. "Hey, you okay?" Delete. "Do you want me to stop coming by?" Delete. Who was that? Definitely delete. I thought about her words. "You remind me of him." Maybe that's all it ever was. A projection, a shadow. Maybe she only saw the younger version of her son in me, not me. Still, I kept checking my phone, waiting. A week later, I ran into my friend at the campus gym. He was in a hurry, barely pausing, but he mentioned it casually. "Mom's seeing someone. First time since the divorce. Guess it's serious." He didn't notice how the words hit me. He was already tying his shoes, talking about something else. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter. Inside, everything went hollow. That night, I walked by her house again. Lights were on in the living room. I could see movement behind the blinds. Two figures, hers and someone taller. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, half hidden in shadow. I told myself I was just passing through, but I didn't move. She laughed at something he said. Not loud, but enough that I heard it through the window screen. It wasn't the soft, careful laugh she'd given me at the coffee shop. It was lighter, freer. I stood there until I felt stupid. Then I walked away. Back in my room, I opened my phone again. I typed, "I miss talking to you." My thumb hovered over send for a long time. Then I locked the screen, left it unsent. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The message sat there, waiting. So did I? And neither of us moved. It had been almost 2 weeks since I last saw her. Long enough that I'd convinced myself it was done, that whatever almost happened had already dissolved into the space between us. But one evening, as I was walking back from the store, I saw her sitting on the porch. Alone this time. No extra car in the driveway, no voices behind the blinds. Just her, a mug cradled in both hands, staring at nothing. I froze at the corner. I could have kept going, pretended I didn't see her. But my legs betrayed me, and before I knew it, I was climbing the steps. She noticed me halfway up. Her expression flickered, surprise, then hesitation. But she didn't tell me to leave. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, nodding toward the mug. "Herbal tea," she said. "Supposed to help." "Doesn't." I sat down on the step below hers. Close, but not too close. The wood was cool under me, the night air heavy with crickets. For a while we said nothing. Just sat there, two people who'd run out of excuses. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know why you keep showing up." I swallowed. "Maybe because you don't tell me not to." She gave a tired laugh, almost bitter. "I did. You didn't listen. You didn't mean it," I said quietly. Her head turned sharply, like I'd hit too close. She studied me, eyes guarded but softening. "You think you know what I mean?" I didn't answer right away. My chest was tight, words tangling. I wanted to tell her I thought about her every day, that I replayed every pause, every glance, like evidence in some invisible trial. But all I managed was, "I know I don't want to stop." Her hands tightened on the mug. "You're too young. Too close." "It's wrong." The word stung, but she didn't let it linger. Her voice cracked slightly as she added, "And I don't know what you expect from me." I turned then, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "Nothing. Just to be here. That's all." It wasn't poetry, but it was the truth. She looked away, exhaling shakily. "Do you realize what this would cost me? If anyone, if he—" She stopped, biting the inside of her cheek. "It would ruin everything." The silence after that felt endless. Crickets. A distant car. My heartbeat thudding in my ears. And then I said it. Not a declaration, not a confession, just a fracture of honesty. "You make me feel like I'm not invisible." Her head turned back slowly, eyes wide but shining. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me like the words had cracked something open. We sat there, locked in it. I thought about leaning up, about erasing the space between us. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence carry the rest. Finally, she set the mug down on the step beside her. Her hand lingered on the wood, trembling slightly. Then, with a hesitation so human it broke me, she let her fingers brush the back of mine. Not a grab, not a claim, just the smallest touch, warm and real. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "Okay." That was all. But it was enough. Autumn came quietly, the kind that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but with small, patient changes. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the cool bite in the morning air, the way the light through her kitchen window shifted from gold to gray. We'd stopped pretending by then. Not that there was some declaration, no dramatic moment where everything was decided. It just settled. I still went by in the evenings, sometimes with a bag of groceries, sometimes with nothing but time to waste. She'd be in the kitchen, hair loose now more often than not, steeping chamomile tea she still claimed didn't work. I'd sit at the table, folding the napkin she set under my cup into neat lines, a habit neither of us commented on anymore. Some nights we barely spoke. Just the sound of the kettle, the ticking clock, the clink of mugs against wood. It was enough. Other times she'd share bits of her day, a problem at work, an old memory, the book she'd finished. Once, she told me she still drove past the coffee shop on Main, but didn't stop anymore. "Too bitter," she said. "And anyway, I already know how you take yours. Black, no sugar." I smiled at that. It was the kind of thing only we would remember. We walked sometimes, too. Back to the park, the same bench where she'd once asked, "What are we doing?" The leaves had turned by then, scattering the path with reds and golds. We sat close enough that our shoulders brushed, her hand sometimes resting near mine, sometimes finding it without ceremony. No one stopped us. No one looked twice. It wasn't about secrecy anymore. It was about choosing when and how to be seen. Her son came by less often, busy with his own life. And when he did, I wasn't there. That was the boundary. She never said it outright, but I understood. Some parts of her world needed to stay untouched. And I accepted that, because what we had was enough. More than enough. One morning, months later, I found myself awake at 8:47 a.m. The exact time I'd once sat in that coffee shop, staring at her across the room, not knowing what any of it meant. Now, the memory felt almost foreign, like looking back at a younger version of myself I barely recognized. I walked into her kitchen and found her there, already pouring hot water over tea leaves. She glanced up, smiled, small, easy, unguarded. "You're early," she said. I couldn't sleep. I answered, sliding into the chair across from her. She pushed a mug toward me. "No sugar." Of course. We didn't need to say more. Later, as we sat on the porch watching the neighborhood wake up, the mail truck down the street, the distant bark of a dog, I thought about all the ways this could have gone differently. The times I almost didn't knock. The messages I almost didn't send. The pauses that could have stayed pauses forever. Instead, here we were. Not perfect. Not storybook. Just real. I looked at her, the steam from her tea curling upward in the cool air, and she caught me staring. "What?" she asked, amused. "Nothing," I said. Then after a pause, softer. "Just glad it's you." Her smile held for a long time. She didn't answer, not in words. She reached over, lightly resting her hand on mine. the same way she had on that bench months ago. Only this time, she didn't let go. And I realized then that this, quiet mornings, cold coffee, shared silence, was what it meant to arrive at something real. Something that would last, even if no one else knew how it started. Because we knew. And that was enough.